Hey yo people, do you wanna go so fast that picking up loot lowers your profit per hour? Well, look no further because here I am with another blaster build, and if you're not subscribed yet, well, it's kinda weird, but you can click the button now, so it's okay. To me, speed is fun, and fun equals profit, but usually to achieve the cracked zoom setups cost a cracked amount of currency. However, this one turned out surprisingly cheap and effective. Although as always, to unlock its full potential and blast the content even harder, you will want to invest hundreds of divines, probably slap a mage blood. I have some cool plans for that, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. What we are going to talk about is what the build is good and bad at, the whole idea of the build, gear and budget options, and why build the build the way that I build the build. So, it is amazing in scenarios that involve a lot of monsters and or require you to cover a lot of ground, making things like delve or juiced up map blasting as well as boss rushing incredibly fun and fast to do. But because of how this build works, high-end bosses and tough enemies in general, in scenarios where you don't get to kill any monsters, will be a bit harder. And although I did clear the Feared Invitation deathless, killed some 600 plus depth owls, bossing is definitely not its strongest suit. So definitely uber boss viable, yep. PoB will be linked in the description below, and it contains multiple different gem, gear, and tree setups for different levels of investment ranging from bare minimum to high end. That out of the way, what is this build? Technically, it's ethereal knives, but technically not. More like a shield charge build, but technically not. It's a light poacher build, but technically not. Depends on how you look at it and what content you are doing. But overall, it is a rage regen, physical to elemental spell-based crit inquisitor, or as I like to call it, rage sprinkler. Without going ham into explanations, I will quickly cover everything you need to know about the synergies in this build, followed by a deeper dive with explanations, gear breakdown, and finish it all off with a quick F.A.Q barrage. Fake barrage? F.A.Q barrage sounds about right. Anyway, the main idea of this build is to use shield charge and go pew pew pew. So to make it into a proper blaster build, this is what I used. Ethereal Knives, or EK, the main single target damage skill, Light Poacher Helmet for green flying balls on the screen, Abyss Jewel stacking for Light Poacher's effect scaling, Power Charge stacking for global damage and crit chance, Badge of the Brotherhood Frenzy charges for global damage and speed, Endurance charges for resistances and global fizz mitigation, Restless Ward for energy shield, movement speed per frenzy, and life regen per endurance charge, Come Spread Gloves for rage regen to use Berserk, Berserk for speed, tank, and damage, Petrified Blood for low life plus pain attunement and overleach to counter the downside from the gloves, Pious Path Ascendancy for life regen to also regenerate energy shield, therefore sustain righteous fire, 1 Pierce Cluster plus Anomalous Faster Projectile Support Gem for projectiles have 60% chance to return to you, aka 60% more damage, Projectile Speed for better clear experience, and Inevitable Judgment Ascendancy for damage and quality of life. That's pretty much all you need to know about the build, but now let me explain. With Light Poacher Helmet equipped, you gain Spirit Charges on kill and trigger Spirit Burst every time you use a skill. Any skill, consuming 1 Spirit Charge to fire projectiles in a circle. This allows us to just shield charge around and blast everything with 360 coverage. There are some interesting projectile modifying options like Volley or GMP, but F.A.Q seems like the best option overall. One thing to note about these Spirit Burst projectiles is that they are pretty slow, that's why projectile speed is of high value. I have faster projectile support gem in the helmet, some projectile speed on projectile damage clusters, and projectile speed on the weapon. It has to be a wand specifically, otherwise you cannot roll projectile speed. And yes, the Light Poacher helmet is not new, however in 3.21 Crucible League, it received some massive buffs. Now you have 100% chance to gain a Spirit Charge on kill instead of 15 to 20%, and now it gives 5% physical damage as extra damage of each element per Spirit Charge, instead of recovering some life when you lose a Spirit Charge. Because of these changes, it now has consistent clear and provides a great damage boost while those charges are up. However, in a boss fight scenario where you don't get to kill any enemies, this helmet does practically nothing. And I know there are a few ways to sustain these charges, but it's not really doable in this build with this setup. Speaking of single target, my main damage skill of choice is EK. It just makes sense because both the Spirit Burst and Ethereal Knives are projectiles and both are physical spells, so nearly identical damage scaling applies to both. The exception being cast speed. It increases your EK single target DPS but doesn't help one-shot enemies with Spirit Burst while clearing with shield charge. Now let's look into how and why I built the build and how you can too. For bandits, I chose to kill all for 2 additional skill points, but if you can get enough dexterity, you can drop these 2 points and help Alira, gaining a bit more damage, some resistances, and around 10 mana per second. As long as you reach 100 dexterity for level 21 ethereal knives, all other dexterity gems can be down leveled with minimal impact to the build. I would recommend to look for clusters with as much dexterity as possible. All attributes, chaos, or elemental resistances are also a good option for later optimization. Early on though, you can even cover resistances and dexterity gaps with your Abyss Jewels. Just try to pair those mods with at least crit multi and let Light Poacher effect take care of the rest. It's essentially 15% of physical damage gained as extra damage of a random element per Abyss Jewel. So to not worry about all 3 types of exposure, penetration, and curses, you can just spec into Inquisitor's Ascendancy Inevitable Judgment. Your critical strikes treat enemies as if they would have 0 resistances. That eliminates the need for any resistance modifying mechanics, which opens up some gem sockets and implicits. That's great even when there's only 1 damage type to scale, but it becomes incredibly juicy when there are multiple elements involved, like in this case, all 3. Just use Sniper's Mark on bosses and you're ready to deal the dam. But ignoring enemies' elemental resistances only works if the hits are critical strikes. That's why getting to 100% or as close to 100% crit chance is important. The Ascendancy point leading up to Inevitable Judgment helps, but we need more. A lot more. Crit clusters, all the power charges, and 1 Crucible tree weapon mod, added base critical strike chance for spells with negative crit multi. Although it has a hefty downside, it is by far the cheapest and easiest way to get to 100% critical strike chance. Stacking power charges also unlocks the Forbidden Blaster tech, Badge of the Brotherhood Amulet plus Restless Ward plus Omega Zumi Boots. The more power charges you get, the higher the elusive effect, and maximum power charges equals maximum frenzy charges, so the more power charges you get, the more frenzy charges you get, the more movement speed from the body armor. Also, you can get both the weapon and the shield with a Crucible mod that gives -1 to maximum frenzy charges, but gain 4% movement speed per frenzy charge. Because Badge of the Brotherhood bypasses the -1 frenzy charge downside, it's just free zoomies. A great synergy for stacking power charges on a Templar is one of the Guardian Ascendancy's Conviction of Power, which we yoink with Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels. Not only does it give +1 maximum power charges, but also 4 permanent endurance charges. Pair that with the Restless Ward body armor and you get a huge life regen boost. I opted to get 1 more maximum endurance charge on the tree and a ring with crafted minimum endurance charge, for a total of 5 permanent endurance charges that together provide 20% global physical damage reduction, 20% all elemental resistances, and 375 flat life regen that gets scaled by increased life regeneration rate on boots up to 450. The aforementioned Forbidden Jewels have been very affordable this league, ranging from 10 to 20 divines for both of them, so I recommend to prioritize buying them before it's too late. However, if they become too expensive, non-existent, or you are starting out and need cheap alternatives, don't worry, there are options. Because Restless Ward body armor also provides a lot of increased charge duration, getting charges on kill or when hit is still very reliable. Option 1, Lethal Pride with 5% chance to gain an endurance charge on kill. Probably the best, cheapest, and most accessible option. You also gain 2 jewel sockets or 4 passive points and an open suffix on a ring. Option 2, Veiled minimum endurance charge on a ring. Has to be veiled and not crafted to have the chance to gain on kill. And last but not least, option 3, Small 2 passive cluster jewel with enduring composure. You lose a jewel socket and 2 passive points, but you get to maintain your endurance charges even in bossing encounters, since you only have to get hit once every 30 seconds or so. I can't stress enough that getting as much regen as possible is very important for this build, both defensively and offensively. Normally, Inquisitors go for a Corrupted Soul Keystone that splits all non-chaos damage taken into 50% taken from life and 50% taken from Energy Shield, which works great with Pious Path Ascendancy, which essentially duplicates your life regen onto your Energy Shield, making sustaining Righteous Fire an easy task. If you are taking 1000 fire damage per second, you only need 500 life regen. But with Come Spirit Gloves, life recovery from regeneration is not applied, meaning that you are not recovering life from it, but the regen is still there. That's why Pious Path Ascendancy still gets to copy all that regen onto your Energy Shield, but you would be constantly losing life, making this damage split into a hindrance rather than a buff, meaning that to sustain 1000 fire damage per second without Corrupted Soul, now you need 1000 life regen. Then the game looks at your life regeneration value, divides it by 100, and that's how much rage regen you get. One thing to note, life recovery rate doesn't apply to rage regen in-game, although it does in PoB, but life regeneration rate does and is the highest value stat. In my PoB, you can find a low-level, bare minimum version of the build that has no corruptions, no expensive gems, no expensive clusters, no Crucible. Then there is a budget setup with a few non-expensive corruptions, more cluster jewels, better gems, notably anomalous faster projectiles, the default setup, which is basically a normal non-cracked endgame setup, and then the high-end setup, which, well, has more expensive stuff like +1 power charge shield, better biz jewels, better gems, but not quite the mage blood or triple implicit perfect weapon kind of high-end setup. For this video though, I will be focusing on the default setup, and by default in PoB there will be 0 spirit charges because I like to think that if the build is good without them, it is going to be great with them. So let's look at the passive skill tree, starting with masteries. We have a life mastery for 30% of mana cost as life, plays a big part in mana sustain and goes very nicely in combination with the new recovery mastery for an instant full life heal every 4 seconds, preservation mastery for life preservation to fit both vitality and a herald, crit mastery for crit multi against bosses, and another reservation mastery for +1 maximum elemental resistances. Since this is a light poacher build and more abyss jewels is better than less abyss jewels, I'm going for as many point efficient jewel sockets as possible. You really want to get 1 jewel with corrupting blood immunity corruption, 1 jewel with chance to gain phasing on kill, and then the rest are completely flexible. Even with my modified search filter for better results, there are a lot of good and cheap jewels for under 10 chaos each. A link to that search will be waiting for you in the notes section of my PoB. I got 2 large clusters with Prismatic Heart for resistances, Saddest is the best damage node, and one of them with Doriani's Lesson for a life leech. 2 medium projectile damage cluster jewels, mainly for projectile speed, one of them with aerodynamics for pierce, which is good for clear and also important for a big damage boost from anomalous faster projectiles. 2 medium crit chance cluster jewels, mainly for critical strike chance, and if you're a delve enjoyer like me, instead of 2 crit clusters, use 1, while the remaining points should be spent getting the chest opening mastery. It's just so good, it's amazing. Storm Shroud Jewel for complete ailment immunity. You need 100% chance to avoid being shocked, and I have exactly 100% from a Crucible shield tree. Although not ideal, but there are a few other ways to get that. 2 or more abyss jewels with chance to avoid being shocked. They can roll up to 50%, so you could even have 1 50% jewel in a 100% increased effect, Darkness and Throne Belt. There's also an essence mod that goes up to 60%, so you could craft the non-elusive boots with it and drop a resistance mod. Then I have 2 sockets for Forbidden Flame and Flash jewels. As I mentioned earlier, there are some budget alternatives such as Endurance Charge on Kill a Lethal Pride jewel. If you didn't know, there is a quick and easy way to get the best Timeless Jewel option, as well as get a trade website link for it. In Path of Building, at the bottom, click the button Find Timeless Jewel. Select the jewel type, in this case Lethal Pride. Conqueror doesn't really matter, I'm not using the keystone, but I have some plans for later, so I chose Rakiata. Select the jewel socket, in this case the socket near agnostic. Check the filter nodes box, so it only looks at the nodes you have allocated on your tree. Keep the default node weight options, and in the search for node box, select the mod you want to get. The main 3 mods are 5% chance to deal double damage, 4% life, and 5% physical damage as extra fire. Double damage is better when you have spirit charges up, whereas physical as extra fire is better when you don't have them. Also, if you choose to go for this budget option, there's Endurance Charge on Kill. To make sure that the search results will have the mods that you want, change the last 0 into 1 to have at least 1 node with this mod, then click search. It will give you all the possible variations where at least 1 notable will have Endurance Charge on Kill. You can hover over them to see what mods can be found on what notables on your tree. But to get more value out of this jewel, you can add the other GG mods as a requirement of at least 1. Let's say I want to get at least 1 life node and at least 1 physical damages extra fire. Change the zeros into 1 and hit search. Now you have all these options to choose from. You can double click on one to add to your items and look at what the other nodes are. Look for the best value, find the correct number, or if you're just looking for the cheapest one, click copy trade URL, paste it in your browser, and you can buy your perfect or not so perfect timeless jewel. Now moving on to the gear section. The weapon has to be a 1 for projectile speed, and before you can spend multiple divines crafting a proper weapon like this, just get a fractured projectile speed base with % spell damage implicit and toss a few spell damage essences. You can also use the trade for these items PoB function, but it's not exactly what we want, so I modified the search and left it in the notes section. Shield has to be pure energy shield base so we can roll the caster mods. So get a fractured base with tier 1 to tier 2 spell damage, spam Essence of Greed until you hit +1 Fizz Gems, prefixes cannot be changed, harvest Reforged Caster or Crit, and craft double damage. The helmet, +1 part charge corruption, try to get good resistances, and Berserk has 40% reduced rage loss per second. Helmet enchant is a huge boost to Berserk uptime, so definitely worth spending a few divines buying the enchant service on TFT. For the body armor, you want to prioritize the corruptions, and the best corruption combination is +2 duration gems, +2 projectile gems. +1 socket gems is not ideal since there is no empower in the setup, but also a decent option. For gloves, spell crit corruption, pretty important, and then get as much fire resistance as possible. For boots, you want to get a pair of hybrid armor energy shield boots with fractured life regeneration rate, ideally 21% roll, and use a few resistance essences until you hit another tier 1 mod of your choice. For budget, it's just dual res, but with better gear you can instead get chaos resistance plus flat regen. And for the prefixes, you can use Eldritch currency to get life and finish with an onslaught on kill craft, or if you want more speed and have more money to spare, go for suffixes cannot be changed, veiled chaos orb, and do that until you unveil onslaught on kill. Get the cheapest Eldritch implicits and you're ready to blast. You can also just use a silver flask instead of a defensive flask if you have to drop the onslaught from the boots, but you ideally want them on the boots. As for the Omega Blaster boots, it is a luxury option. You should only swap into elusive boots if you can get the good regen as your last suffix, because again, regen is super important. Crafting these boots yourself requires either to get really lucky or spend a lot of time and resources awaken orbing until an open suffix, lock suffix, and reforge life. But it's not like the build is slow with normal boots, so just get the cheap ones that are super easy to craft. The amulet, we want to anoint infused, and then attribute catalyst for more dexterity. Getting a low roll on chance to lose a friendly charge when you use a travel skill is also pretty nice. For rings, we have the death rush for adrenaline. You can't beat adrenaline for a blasting setup, so there it is. And then the other ring is more defensive. We focus on an open suffix for minimum endurance charge, and then the double resistance to catalyst and get as much as possible from the ring slot, so I can drop resistances from boots, and then of course life energy shield as much as possible if possible. And then since we're stacking abyss jewels, the abyss socket belt, either Stygian wise normal with a bunch of resistances and whatever you need to finish the build, or double socket for best damage output. 94% jewel effect seemed like the most cost efficient option, and then more percent it didn't really affect the build. But if you can get them 100%, sure, go for it. Not really much of a benefit, but yeah. Flasks are pretty good, pretty important, pretty high value. However, when I was leveling to level 100 and I accidentally took the Meteor Altar, I just took off all of my flasks and the build was just fine. It was completely fine, right? So you don't need them, but this is what I'm using. I'm using the Exploding Flask. It's not mandatory by any means. In fact, there's almost no difference in clear without the flask, almost being the key word. It is better with a flask, of course, just not necessary. And the idea here is to swap into a Bottled Faith or a Life Flask when fighting bosses. Then there's a Ruby Flask for the reduced mana cost of skills. This is so that I don't run out of mana with acceleration shrines while mapping, and reduced fire damage taken is a nice boost to my regen. Also, it has a very long base duration and low charge requirement, so increased effect works just fine. A Quicksilver, Zoomies, Amethyst with Life Regen Craft, Chaos Res Regen, yep, and I'm running a Jade Flask with % evasion to get to 36 chance to beat attacks. It's nice, however, it is a flexible slot since more than half of the time I'm at 0 evasion from the altar mods, so Taste of Hate or some other flask would probably be better. As for gems, not going to go through every single gem, but there are two main things I want to point out. One, if you don't like Spell Echo, increased critical damage support is a good alternative, and two, you need Anomalous Arrogance to fit in a max level vitality, and not ruin the Petrified Blood overleech, that is. And lastly, Pantheons. Soul of the Brand King for stun lock protection and freeze immunity plus chill effect reduction until you get full ailment immunity. This can be swapped into Aracali once you do have the ailment immunity for more damage over time protection, but in Delve Depth 700 plus, I noticed that I'm getting stunned a lot, so I swapped back to stun protection, and then the small Pantheon is pretty much always Burning Ground immunity, great both for red altar farming and delving. Now let's commence with the F.A.Q barrage. Why Berserk on a caster build? 20% less damage taken from all sources, 30% more movement speed, 20% more attack speed, and with Divergent quality it also gives 5% more spell damage. Shield charge speed is scaled by both your movement speed and attack speed, resulting in a very feels good shield charge experience. How can I see my rage regen per second value in game? You look at your energy shield regen per second value and divide it by 100. How do you sustain Righteous Fire with these gloves? Normally, Comspirit gloves disable regen completely, but not on Inquisitor. because the regen is still there, just the life recovery part of your regen is not applied. So Pious Path Ascendancy essentially duplicates your life regen onto energy shield, and energy shield recovery is not disabled by the gloves, meaning that if you have 1000 life regen, you will also have 1000 energy shield regen. How to not die from Petrified Blood degen. Life Recoup, instant life recovery every 4 seconds mastery, and overleech from Petrified Blood. Recoup works great, but in 3.21 GGG added a new recovery mastery. It has the same downside as our gloves, life recovery from regeneration is not applied, but the upside is that every 4 seconds you instantly recover 10 times the amount of your regen per second, which if you have 1000 life regen per second, this would instantly recover 10,000 life every 4 seconds. From my experience, this is more than enough, and in some cases even better than Recoup. So I dropped the life recoup notes completely. However, if you use Anomalous Petrified Blood for a bit better one-shot protection, Recoup might regain its value. How does Petrified Blood Overleech work? Well, how does normal leech work? When your life touches the top of your life bar, leech stops, discarding all of the remaining recovery. The same thing happens if you reserve something on your life, but now the top of your life bar is lower. However, Petrified Blood makes you unable to recover life above the low life value, which by default is 50% of your maximum life. So if there is a gap of at least 1 life in between your reserved life and your 50% lifeline, Leech doesn't stop its effect until it runs out. There's more to it, but that's all that really matters. How do you generate frenzy charges? Blood Rage. 25% chance to gain on kill. Since they last around 25 seconds, there's no need to worry about map boss encounters. However, Anomalous Blood Rage gives 2% chance to gain a frenzy on hit, which is enough to maintain them. But in most cases, not enough to go from 0 to max. So to kickstart all charges before a big boss encounter, I use Relicash Impatience Boots Swap. Can this build do uber bosses? No, stop! Well, maybe, but don't do it. Can this build do 80% deli? Yes. We can shield charge through no problem, even 100% deli max juice is doable, but definitely not on low budget. How much does this build cost? There are no enlightens or anything expensive that is mandatory, just Light Poacher, Come Spirit Gloves, Restless Sword, and Badge. Well, technically you don't even need Badge, so it works perfectly fine with just a few cheap items, but has plenty of avenues to sing hundreds of divines to unlock the full potential of this blaster beast. I have different setups for gems, gear, and tree in my PoB, ranging from bare minimum to high end, although the multi-mirror min-max plus Mage Blood variant is still missing, but that is also coming soon, as soon as I stop losing all my gambles. Surely, right? Where can I see this build in action? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Chances are that I might be online right now, so come take a look at twitch.tv/F.A.Q.